Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this talk. I'd like to tell you a little bit about the space technology research that we carry out at the University of Surrey. Again, in the time, we can only be really brief. We began about 30 years ago. We've had a couple of comments today about how it's important to have track record. Just as a student thinking, well, wouldn't it be nice if the UK had a spacecraft? So why don't we build one? And we did. And we managed to persuade NASA to launch it for us for free. And that became USAT-1 and was very successful. We supported amateur radio and amateur science and tried to encourage young people into science and engineering. So successful, in fact, that NASA came back to us a couple of years later and offered us a second free ride into space, which we took. And in just 6 months, we designed and built a spacecraft, and that became USAT-2. I think still a world record in terms of time to deliver a fully functional spacecraft. So we thought, well, this is interesting. This is great fun to do. How can we manage to carry on this kind of research? So what we did is we formed our own company, Surrey Satellite Technology Limited, SSTL, as a spin-out company of the University of Surrey to market this technology really to the rest of the world. And I'm pleased to say that grew from about 6 of us or so who started it to now over 300 employees. And indeed, we sold SSTL off last year to EADS Astrium, and I think it's turned out to be the most successful university sell-off ever. But today, we still work very closely with our commercial colleagues, and that synergy between academia and industry has proved to be crucial to our success. So this all began when my director, Professor Sir Martin Sweeting, recognized very early on the power of the microprocessor and understood that with modern microelectronics, we could make very small spacecraft do a really important job of work in space, and this would completely change the economics of space flight. At that era, of course, space was largely the domain of NASA in the United States and the USSR, with perhaps a little bit of work in space by the European Space Agency. But basically the big players, what we wanted to do was to open up space to the rest of the world. And by leveraging the enormous investment there is in commercial off-the-shelf technologies, we were able to apply that to space vehicles, to understand how to use these COTS technologies in the harsh environment of space, and to deliver spacecraft that can actually do useful functions. And it really has revolutionized spaceflight research. In the last 20 years, then, we've launched some 34 space missions. Often it's been the sort of hidden space success story of the United Kingdom. We hear a lot, of course, about NASA's research in space, etc., but remarkably few people seem to know that the UK has this specialism in small satellite research. In fact, it's the world leader in that sort of technology. So from USAT-1 back in 1981, we've gone on to launch many missions with partners worldwide, and indeed have began whole new space agencies. In fact, 6 new space agencies have been trained and got started by working with ourselves at Surrey. And from those early technology demonstrating satellites and scientific satellites, we now provide satellites that provide real functional use, both in communications and in Earth observation, disaster monitoring, and now in satellite navigation. To give you an example of the growth of the company, there's the revenues in millions since we began. And you'll see there pointing out the MOSAIC program. MOSAIC was a program supported by the British National Space Centre, and that really kick-started many of the real applications of our satellite technology. So we moved from technology demonstration really to applied technology, and particularly kicking off the disaster monitoring constellation and TopSat, a military system, and also paving the way for the Galileo program, which is one of the biggest programs now in European space that is providing navigation solutions to ourselves. We've worked with many countries worldwide, and in fact Surrey is very much an international university, and it's been great to work with so many different partners. The basic model is to transfer this technology by training teams of engineers from those countries, providing ground station facilities in those countries, and working together on space vehicles. And DMC, the Disaster Monitoring Constellation, is a fantastic example of how we can pool resources to make a truly world-beating system. We're all used to Hollywood movies, and we get this idea, you know, that you can sort of zoom in and read car number plates from spacecraft. Sadly, this is all science fiction rather than science fact. A single, say, US spacecraft might take an image of London today. It'll be another 14 days before it exactly overflies London again. What we wanted was to put a system in space that could image anywhere on Earth within a 24-hour period. And it turned out it was possible if we could launch 4 or 5 spacecraft in a ring around the Earth. As they orbit around the Earth, they basically form a sort of scan of the Earth's surface below, and from that then we can image the entire Earth's surface. And putting those 4 or 5 spacecraft into orbit actually cost less than a single conventional spacecraft. We've used that system. The system was first deployed in 2002. We've used that system to support the Afghan government, for example, spotting opium fields growing out in the deserts of Helmand. Those bright red streaks you see along the river valleys there, that's agriculture growing in the desert regions. Some of that agriculture is in fact poppy fields. We've supported disaster monitoring in terms of flooding. For example, the impact of Katrina. Our Nigeria-SAT spacecraft was the first spacecraft on the scene to take images of that and provide those images for humanitarian workers. We've used them to support climate change research, monitoring how the Earth is changing. And it really is changing rapidly. And things like forest fires as well. Indeed, the success of that constellation has led to another fully commercial constellation where we launched 5 separate satellites to provide global agricultural monitoring. There is an enormous amount of revenue and money to be made by monitoring the growth of crops worldwide. If I can see what crops are growing today, I can predict what the price of bread and grain is going to be in 6 months' time. We can also help the environment. From space, our instruments can spot disease and stress in vegetation long before you would ever do so with the naked eye just sitting in the field. And from that, we can spot outbreaks of disease, nip them in the bud with very small amounts of chemical usage, saving time, saving money, and saving food. And food is going to be one of the big pressure points on us in the coming century. With our research into COTS technology in space, we took the challenge from the European Space Agency to apply this to a much higher orbit, 23,000 kilometre higher orbit, where levels of radiation are truly stupendous. And ourselves in the Space Centre worked on how to design the spacecraft to survive that extremely hostile environment, hitherto only really occupied by the United States and by the, what was the Soviet Union with the GPS satellites and GLONASS satellites. The result was GOVA, a satellite delivered on time and on budget, and within a remarkably short period of getting onto orbit, just a couple of days, we were able to transmit what will be the future generation of navigation signals, giving much more precise navigation data to our sort of in-car navigation systems, but also supporting emergency services, and also providing what we call a safety of life system, so a system which is civilian and also is guaranteed. And in fact, the success of that has led to SSTL gaining the contract for the full constellation. So it's been a major boom to the UK. In fact, we've calculated it's something like a 500 to 1 return on investment into the UK in terms of tax revenues. So space, often seen as a very expensive, perhaps something, people say, why are you spending money on space and not on hospitals? Little realizing that that investment in space is actually funding hospitals. So what we've done over the last 25 years is really changed the way that people do business in space. We now see people trying to copy this approach across the world, but still the UK is a global leader in small satellite technology. And in the Space Centre, we're pushing forward the boundaries of research into even more exotic ways of dramatically reducing the cost of space and dramatically increasing the utility. For example, by having swarms of sensors in space to provide pervasive global monitoring so that we can understand our changing world. Thank you very much.